This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Hi, everyone. There's a couple of more seats in the front if anyone wants to come up and get closer to the casket. Oh, come on. Okay, well, you can do it at any point when you feel you're brave. You can just come right on up. So you know my name. I make burial shrouds, and I educate people. I just lost my voice. Hello? Is it back? Okay. Educate people like yourselves about the alternatives that there are to the standard funeral practices that we're given or shown or experience in our culture. So tonight I'm going to talk about some of the alternatives. I have a short film, excerpts of a film actually, that we'll look at. I have some things to show you. I'll give you a lot of information about websites or books that you might want to take a look at, but don't worry because I have them all written down on this list, and at the end you can pick that up so you won't have to be frantically scrambling and writing things on the backs of receipts. Does anyone know what is green burial? It's a term you might have heard now more than the last time I gave this talk, but is it something you've heard about or you have a sort of a vague idea about?
Seems like it'd be without the chemicals.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Environmentally, yeah.
I looked it up on the web after your article in the paper and found out what it was. I had never heard of it. I had a vague notion that it did happen, but I didn't know that it had a name.
So is it in Wikipedia now?
That I didn't know.
Oh, okay. Where did you find it?
Google.
Cool. Just last week I was listening to West Coast Live, that program on Saturday afternoons on public radio. I just happened to tune in, and in the middle of a program, which wasn't even about funerals or burials or caskets or anything, someone was just being interviewed about a book they had written, I think, about a person. Did you hear it? You're nodding. Yeah. And it was this just tangential reference. She said, oh yeah, we when he died we had a green burial. And Sedge Thompson said, what's a green burial? And I thought, oh, right! And so she gave a little description about it, and I thought, wow, this is great. It wasn't even a feature, it was just this sort of side reference. So it's permeating the culture a little bit more. Yeah?
There was an episode on the television show, 6 Feet Under,
Uh-huh.
about Nate burying his wife naturally but illegally.
I heard about that, but I never saw that particular episode.
Well, he stole her body, and she was very fragrant at the time. And he just went to a nature preserve and buried her.
Wow.
Dug a hole.
Great. So it's out there. People are starting to respond to the idea. Most people don't really know, although, again, more people are getting to realize that you don't have to be embalmed. It's not a legal mandate or necessity in any state. But a lot of times people just think it has to be done. And also people think that it is, and actually funeral directors will tell you that it's for sanitation purposes and it's protecting the public health. And that's just not true. Embalming fluid is not a sanitizing fluid, and the Centers for Disease Control actually say that embalming does not do anything towards sanitation. And I have a quote from Dr. Jesse Carr, who is the chief of pathology at the University of California Medical School. He says something interesting. He says, public health virtues of embalming, you can just write it off as inapplicable to our present day conditions. Discussing possible injury to health caused by the presence of a dead body, Dr. Carr explained that in cases of communicable disease, a dead body presents considerably less hazard than a live one. He says, there are several advantages to being dead, he says cheerfully. You don't excrete, inhale, exhale, or perspire. And the body of a person who has died of a non-communicable illness, such as heart disease or cancer, presents no hazard whatsoever. So just remember that. I mean, even if a person dies of a disease that is transmittable, as soon as they die, the host, the host for the organisms is dead, so the organisms begin to die off pretty rapidly. So, and if you're caring for someone while they're ill at home, you're not going to be somehow more exposed to whatever it was that they had after they die than you were all during the time that you were taking care of them. For me, how I got involved in this is that a couple of years ago I was in England in my friend's office and just waiting for her to finish. And I found a book on her bookshelf. It was called The Natural Death Handbook. And I was kind of shocked at the title, so I pulled it off and started reading it. And it really resonated. It talked all about these ideas of green burial, of reclaiming home care of the dead. And so I read for quite a while, and I'm an artist, and I had already been doing some painting of silk. And when I came back to the United States, I just thought I wanted to make burial shrouds. And I wanted to see what it would be like to paint them, to make silk burial shrouds. And that's how I started with this whole thing. Then I did lots and lots of research. First of all, it was hard to even find a picture of a burial shroud. Every time I Googled, in every possible way I could think of, I kept getting the Shroud of Turin, which is like the only one we know about somehow. So I had to go from my own memory from other times, and I have developed several different designs for burial shrouds. Some are made out of linen, some are made out of silk. Later on at the break, I'll let you take a peek at the one that's inside this box. And there's also this one, which is quilted, which is another version I'm working on. But the idea, people have been saying to me, well, can you just be buried in a shroud? Or what is a shroud? Or why would you want a shroud? It's a ceremonial garment for burial, and it's something that has sort of fallen out of favor. People used to be buried in shrouds all the time, and in other countries still are. Sometimes in old folk songs you can hear some of the words about a lamentation of a woman sewing her lover into his shroud, or I think there's a reference to it in the Christmas Carol with Scrooge. But we don't, like I said, it's fallen out of favor. But for my sense of it, it's like we have this vehicle that we've used for however long we get to use it on the planet. And when we're done, a shroud is a way of sort of wrapping it like a gift and returning it to the earth. And we've sort of fallen away from the uses of ceremony in our culture, but like people have baptismal garments, people have wedding garments. Why don't we have funeral garments? So that's what a shroud is. And putting someone in a shroud, and for the particular design of one of them that I have, includes a way of lacing it up. And this is something that a family could do together. People could line up on either side of the body and pass the laces back and forth, and it's like the final goodbye. A few years ago, I took a business course to dispel myself of the fiction that I don't know how to run a business. I'm still working on that one, but in the first meeting of the course, we went around the room and they said, okay, well, what's the business that you're going to be opening? So people were saying, coffee, I'm going to open a coffee shop, home improvement, scrapbooking, burial shrouds, and everyone kind of like ooched away from me, and it was the dead silence for a moment. And they just, they had no idea what to do with that. And the thing is that the class was 12 weeks, and I kept showing up. And so for a while, I was the creepy lady or the death lady, or a guy actually asked me if I would participate in his haunted house that he was putting together for the JCs from Medford. And I said, I think you have the wrong idea about me. But finally, like maybe halfway through the class, maybe a little more than that, someone said to me one night, "You mean you could have like a theme funeral?" And I said, "Yeah, you could. Like if my dad was into hunting and, well, you could put like animals or things on the..." I said, "Yes, you could. You absolutely could. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You could make it personal. You could do whatever you want with it." And by the end of the class, I had made my first prototype, a silk shroud, and there was one fellow, I knew he would be game for this, and I asked him if he would model the shroud. Because in the last class, we had to give our presentation of our business. So when it came my turn, we cleared off one of those big tables, and he lay down on it, and we put the shroud on him, and everyone gathered around. And the shroud has a hood and also a covering for the face. So he was all wrapped up in it, and I was standing at the head of the table, and people were all around on either side. And I said to everyone, "Now imagine, here it is. It's the last moment that you're with this person that you love, and you're just going to say goodbye to them. You're going to tuck them in gently." And I put the cloth over his face and pulled the hood up, and I tucked the edges in on either side. And everyone got really quiet. And some people teared up. And some people said to me later, "You know, I just did not get it until tonight. I just didn't really get what you were doing. But now I get it, and I really like it." And so out of that experience, what I learned was that I need to do a lot of educating. And I need to stand in front of people and say, "Yes, I make burial shrouds," and keep standing there when they go, "Oh," and just try to engage them and talk a little bit. And what I have found is that if I can stand there maybe 5 minutes maximum, people will just start telling me all kinds of things because we want to talk about it. We really want permission to talk about death, to talk about bodies, to talk about what it might be like to prepare a body, to not send it off to the funeral home, to talk about our experiences of death when we were little, to talk about what happened, someone we didn't get to say goodbye to. People are just telling me all kinds of things, which is great. So what I want out of tonight's presentation is that you will feel like you have more permission to talk about this, that it's not going to be a taboo subject. The TV show 6 Feet Under reflects something that we think about when a person is buried. We think they're buried 6 feet under the ground, and often graves are that deep. But if you bury a person, first of all, you fill their body with toxic formaldehyde-based fluids. You drain the bodily fluids and pump these into them. Then you wrap them in a casket that often contains polyester, synthetics, is metal, plastics, varnishes, and you put them inside of a cement grave liner, and then you put them 6 feet under the ground. It's going to take a long time for the earth to actually be able to use any part of that person's body. But and 6 feet under, actually, if you bury a body at 6 feet under without any of all those non-biodegradable wrappings, even if you just bury a body in a shroud at 6 feet, it's below the microbial layer. So it takes much longer for a body to decompose. So really, a body could be buried about 2.5 feet under the ground, and I think we could strew a little bit of biodynamic compost starter in there before we close the grave and get things going pretty quickly.
Is that how it's done?
Some people, in England actually, that is more close to how it's done. And, yes?
So is that legal in this country? Can you bury a body?
It depends on which state you're in. In Oregon, you can be buried on your own land. Now, I'll read you what the State Mortuary and Cemetery Board has to say about that. Although it may not be unlawful, private property burial is not recommended. They have a good reason for this, but they say cemeteries exist for a reason. Once legally dedicated to cemetery purposes, land so dedicated remains sacred and may not be used for any other purpose. Now, of course, we've all heard stories about a highway going through somewhere and, all the bodies being moved. But it is true that people are more loath to move bodies than buildings in terms of reuse of the land. Those contemplating private property burial should seriously consider the extent to which the burial ground will remain sacred to the future owners of the property. And that is something to think about. But just so you know, it is legal in this state. It's not legal in every state, but in our state it is. And you need to get your permits lined up and in order, but you can do it.
Is this an appropriate time for questions?
I'd actually prefer if you could hold off questions. There'll be a time in the second part where I'll open to lots of questions. Let's see. Oh yeah, other cultures. Other cultures in the world do all sorts of different things around burial and death. And they're much more colorful, much more interactive. They're not afraid of dead bodies. They're not even afraid to say dead body, which we are afraid to even say. We are afraid to say he died. Oh, he's just asleep. He's gone on to the other side. He's passed over. I'm sure you can think of 15 more of them. But I'm just remembering a story about a little child who was at a funeral, who was about 4. And she told the friend of mine, she said, I just asked Aunt Patty I just told Aunt Patty some of my secrets, and I told her that I loved her. And my friend said, did she tell anything back to you? And this little 4-year-old looked up at her and said, no, she's dead. She got it, Oh yeah, so there's a great book, which is based on a TV show, called Death, The Trip of a Lifetime. And in this book, and in the TV show, this person goes all over the world just examining customs related to death. And so from that book, I learned this statistic that about half the cultures in the world practice something called disinterment and reburial. And the other half of the cultures in the world either don't know what that is or think it's horrific. How many of you know what that is? A couple people know what it is. Okay. So I'll tell you so far, the most beautiful example of that I have discovered is in Madagascar. There's a tribe in Madagascar for which cloth is the wealth of the tribe. It's passed on like we would pass on china or crystal in our traditions. When a family has a big event, they're gifted with cloth, and then at the end of someone's life, these pieces of cloth are taken and torn into strips and woven to make a garment, a burial garment for the person. So they're either wrapped just in that, or sometimes a coffin is used and this fabric is draped over the coffin. And then after the person is buried, first of all, after they're buried, they're still a part of the tribe. They're still referred to, they're still consulted in various ways, and they're included. And at some point, maybe 9 months later, a year later, that person comes to one of the other people in the tribe in a dream and says, I'm cold. And they know that what that means at that point is that they need a new wrapping. They need a new blanket. So they dig up the body, and they clean the bones, and they rewrap them. And then they have this day-long celebration with music and food and kids and adults, everyone, and they have a big processional parade, and they carry the bones all wrapped up in bundles. And it's very joyful. I saw this little film, they're dancing and they're just carrying these bones, and they put them into this other place, which is like it's bermed. It was sort of built into a hill and domed across the top, and it had this little arched opening, and someone kind of crawled in there, and then they put the bones in there. That's where all the bones are stored. Now, back to that thing I was saying earlier about being buried 2.5 feet under the ground. In England, which is where this woodland burial movement kind of got started, they're running out of space, and they just said, oh, okay, let's start this woodland burial movement, but they didn't really have any standards. So lots of different people were just saying, okay, well, I've got some extra acreage, you can bury here, you can. So there was no, how do we know how deep to bury, or how do we know, or how long will it take a body to decompose before we can use that space again to bury another person? Now that's a really interesting idea to think about, because we don't think about it like that. We think, no, 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 this is my grave forever. No one else is getting in there on top of me or underneath me. Or we think, if you're a pauper, then you're buried in this graveyard where, you're in there with all the other people. But really, what's wrong with burying your body at 2.5 feet, letting the worms and the little things, decompose you completely so you're totally given back to the mother, and then there's room for another person. Do the whole thing again. It's like a compost pile. I mean, really, in the best of ways. And I personally think that part of the difficulties we're having on our planet are because we don't return our bodies to the earth for her to compost anymore. And we make it really difficult. The cement grave liner that I referred to earlier is required not by law, but many cemeteries require that. And they do it because it makes it easier for them to maintain the grounds, because then the grave doesn't sink. But there are ways to mound up the dirt on a grave so that it will sink and become even. And these are just practices that we used to know about that we need to bring back into popular consciousness. I did ask our local cemetery sexton, whose name is Rocky King. I asked him about these grave liners, and he explained to me how they made it much safer for him to do the lawn care. And I said, well, what about someone who really wants to be in touch with the earth? I said, what does this grave liner look like? He said, well, it's a box, really, a big cement box with a lid. So we dig the grave, we put the box in there, we put the casket in there, and we put the lid on. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, what if you dug the grave and you just put the person in there first, and then you put the box upside down over top of them? Could you do that? Because there are people who would really rather be in contact with the earth. And I said to him, in Muslim burial, it's very important for them to be connected with the earth. Because if you bring in a religious precedent, that's a good thing. You can then invoke it even if you're not of that faith. You can say, well, they did it, so I want to do it. And he said to me, well, how many Muslims do we have in our community? I said, well, actually, we do have a Muslim community in our town, but could anyone do this? And he thought about it for a while, and he said, yeah. Nope, yeah, I don't see why not. So just keep that in your mind. No. Where are we? I have a film that I'd like to show, and I think probably now is a good time to show. It's 20 minutes long, so we can have time to see it and then talk about it a little bit. And then I have lots more information to give you after we have a break. There'll be a break at 8 o'clock. But unless anyone has any very pressing questions right now. No? Okay, then let's start the film. The film is here in the library, and you can rent it.
What's it called?
It's called A Family Undertaking. And it chronicles 4 different families and has lots of really lovely interviews with people who have chosen to do this with their family members and how it's affected them. I was particularly touched by that last segment because that couple allowed the filmmaker to come and be there while she was still alive and then after she died. That was such a gift. Did you have a question?
Yes, I guess a comment question. My husband died 3 years ago in North Carolina, and he wanted to give his body for medical research. My husband died 3 years ago in North Carolina and wanted to give his body for medical research. And so when he died, I called the funeral home, the only funeral home in that little town, and they came to get him, but didn't charge a penny, and took him from the emergency room to, I guess, their funeral home to the College of Physicians for cadaver use. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I had to do was sign papers. there was no money exchanged or anything. And then after 18 months or so, if you want the, they're usually through with the cadaver 18 months to 2 years. If you want the ashes, you can go pick them up. Or they will bury them like in a mass ashes grave, a crematory thing. Well, when I moved to Ashland, I called a local funeral home asking how I could donate my body to science. And I got sort of a runaround, and then I finally got a statement that it was cheaper to be cremated than to give your body to a college, which I guess is around Portland. And I think he quoted me $1,600 because you'd have to be somewhat embalmed or something to transport up to Portland. And whereas cremation was something like between $800 and $1,200. So I tried to email the college in Portland, and they never answered me. So I guess that's my statement in question.
It is true. It's not free. You can do it. The price that I understood was less than $1,600. That may have been including transportation or some services that funeral director would do for you.
Well, for once, the
But-
South is ahead of
Mhm.
the North.
I'm wondering, before I take your question, I just wonder if anyone wants to share anything about what it was like to see various parts of that film. Was there a part that was harder to watch than another part, or was there something you had never known about?
I had never seen so graphically the process
Of embalming,
and all that, and when she talked about that, my whole first shock was just like going into spasms. It was very hard to watch. And imagining anybody I know and love going through that was a horrific thought.
I had always had an intense, so almost violent feeling like I don't want those people to touch me when I die, and now I know why.
Yeah.
I didn't know why, but now I know why.
My mother-in-law passed on, and she always liked things. She was Jewish, but she always liked everything very inexpensive. That's what she wanted. And so we came into the funeral area, and we said, well, we want an inexpensive one. And he kind of said, well, you can just look around, and left. So we had to go look at the prices, and it was
Right.
way in the back.
Yep.
The least, and so we just all let go of that and just played that, looking at him and say, I pawned one, kind of, but it was very rude of him.
Yes.
It was just their way of putting it on you. It was one thought that came up for me.
Do you have something?
What is the Oregon laws? What are the Oregon laws in terms of cremation?
Can you elaborate on your question? What do you mean? What are the laws?
Well, we've described a normal body burial,
Yes.
all right? How does cremation differ from that?
Some states say you have to be embalmed before you're cremated.
Oh, you definitely don't. Actually, it's illegal for them to tell you that. It's a federal law that embalming is not necessary. Funeral homes will put it in their package. If you want cremation, then you can get a package doing and blah, blah, blah. But you can refuse it. You have the right to refuse it. In fact, you have the right to look at, they have to give you sort of an a la carte list of services. You don't have to buy a package. They will combine various packages, but you don't have to buy a package.
Is that true
And-
even if the body is transported several hundred miles away?
Yes. But to answer your question, I'm still trying to understand your question. Cremation we have a crematorium right here in Ashland. Actually, I want to say, too, that our Ashland Funeral Home folks are really, really lovely. Both of them are just very nice people to deal with, and they're very cooperative. So, I just want you to know that also happens. And they have a crematorium right here. And so you can choose to be cremated. You don't have to be embalmed. You can be put in a box very like this, or you can have your own casket. You don't have to buy a casket from them. Someone else can make a casket. But then you can also be there, if you like, to watch the body as it's put into the retort. It's called a retort. We have just a couple more minutes before the break, so you had a question for a while back there.
Just a comment about burial on land, and that is, there are certain county restrictions, and one is how near a water source it is. And the main thing they say to think about is reselling that piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
As many people, you have to mark the land that there is a grave on it.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they don't is because many people will not purchase that piece of land. So if you're going to keep it in your family for the next 100 years, that may be okay, but if your children are going to try and sell that land, it may be a problem. Now, what we will see, I think, are parcels of land that will be bought and developed into green cemeteries, and I would think Ashland would be a wonderful place for that. I just want to comment on this presentation. As a hospice nurse for 13 years, I think we have been trying to get people to reclaim their right to do this. And the more knowledgeable you are, and the more knowledge you have, the more you can take part in this. We always offer to go at the death and bathe the body. We encourage families to do it. We encourage families to leave the body in the home. We have had people stay in the home up to 3 days on dry ice. I think that there are so many people that say, I don't want a funeral, I don't want a ceremony, which is really detrimental to families' grief. It's that people really need hands-on experiences. My own mother, I can say just for Mel and the funeral home directors, is my mom just died a couple months ago, and being a hospice nurse, I knew exactly what I wanted. And I didn't have a shroud, but my mother loved beautiful things, and I bought the most beautiful embroidery sheets I could find at a little store in Medford called Forever After. And I had them home and washed for several months, and when she became very ill, I called my husband and I said, bring the sheets, and we have these lavender boxes to bathe the body. And when she died, what was wonderful is my 21-year-old daughter saw this moment and stepped up next to me and said, Mom, I will help you bathe Grandma's body. And as we bathed her, my daughter actually said, isn't Grandma's skin beautiful? And we dressed her and wrapped her in these sheets. And when the funeral home came and it was Mel, I said, now Mel, you have to understand, my mother is to stay exactly as she is right now, that her grandchildren are coming to see her. And there was a decision about when she would be picked up. And my daughter was the one that said, Mom, it wouldn't be right if Grandma left her room until tomorrow when Uncle Mike came. And I actually spent the night with my mother in that room. And so it is this reclaiming, it is this knowledge, this is, what you want, and saying, is this necessary? Is embalming necessary? No, I don't want this. And then really encouraging your family members to make these preparations and talk about it beforehand. So I appreciate your talk.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your story. I just want to read a little statistic here. The world death rate holding steady at 100%. Death, a metabolic affliction causing shutdown of all life functions, has long been considered humanity's #1 health concern. Responsible for 100% of all recorded fatalities worldwide, the condition has no cure. There's a whole article. It's from The Onion, actually. It's very interesting, strange newspaper. I'm thinking there's just so many directions I can go in, but one thing I want to note is that our culture has a really strong injunction against talking about death, against looking at bodies, against, during Hurricane Katrina, I don't know if you know this, that there was a gag order on the press. They were not permitted after a certain point to show bodies of the dead in the press. And it's been the same for the bodies of our war dead. And thanks to the internet, really, we're having the opportunity to actually see that, the cost of the war. But we just have this denial. It's just so pervasive. We're not allowed to end. We don't like to end anything, actually. And I have this great quote from Pema Chodron. which I would like to read. She says, "For me, the spiritual path has always been learning how to die. That involves not just death at the end of this particular life, but all the falling apart that happens continually. The fear of death, which is also the fear of groundlessness, of insecurity, of not having it all together. This seems to be the most fundamental thing we have to work with. We have so much fear of not being in control. We have so much fear of not being able to hold on to things. Yet the true nature of things is that you're never in control. You are never in control. You can never hold on to anything. So she says, my own path has been training to relax with groundlessness and the panic that accompanies it. Training to die continually." So, along with that denial, I think it sort of went hand in hand with our decision to turn over anything related to death to the professionals. It's kind of strange how it happened really in the last 2 or 3 generations, because before that, people used to care for their own dead at home. It was mentioned in the film. And I had a conversation with my father recently where he told me about his grandmother's funeral and how they did it at home. So I just really want you all to know that it isn't necessary. It's not, someone said this to me, it's not rocket science to care for a body of someone that you love who has died. It's fairly basic, and the transformational experience that's available is just, it's not to be missed, according to many, many people who have had this experience. And for me, it's important to think about, what leads up to it. It's important to be prepared, and people have talked about, in other contexts, talked about living wills or advance directives, and all of those things are important to have in place. But for me, my particular area of interest is what happens after what we call death and before a body is cremated or buried. And I think that there's a mystery that's happening, that's still occurring, and that since we have given up our access to that by calling in the professionals immediately, we've given up access to this great spiritual potential. And so I want to encourage you to think about what might be in the way for you of taking that on. And whatever emotional work is yours to do, but I can at least say, listen, you actually do have the right to do this. And those 2 women who are, the hospice nurse who spoke earlier made clear also that hospice is very much available to help with bathing a body and anointing a body, and you can do it. You can take it on yourself. Let's see, you had a question. I'm trying to remember what. No, about transporting. This is, yes, if someone you love dies in the hospital or in a nursing facility, you have the right to take the body home. Now, you'll have to have a lot of support, and you'll have to maybe even notify, talk to the officials at the hospital or the nursing facility ahead of time and let them know that this is your plan. And if they fight you, you can ask them to call the medical examiner, because I have spoken with the medical examiner here in Jackson County, and he says, yes, you absolutely have the right. No, there isn't even a permit needed for that particular transportation. And what he said to me, and also the director of the Mortuary and Cemetery Board said, our main concern is that the body be treated with respect. Now,
Who said that?
Actually the head of the Mortuary and Cemetery Board said that.
Really?
And so I said, well, what if the family brought in one of these cardboard cremation containers? He said, that's great. That's really great. He said, but you don't even need to do that. You could wrap Grandma in a blanket and carry her out. But you just need to be able to stand firm with the people there to say, I know this is my legal right, and I'd like your cooperation. Do you have a?
Well, are you supposed to notify anybody Are you supposed to notify anybody if someone dies in their home?
Yes, if someone dies in the home that is under hospice care or who has been ill for a long time and their death is expected, then you can just call the doctor, and the doctor can write on the death certificate the cause of death, and then you can, if you're deciding to do a home funeral, you can generate the rest of that death certificate, fill it
But
out.
what if they weren't in hospice?
But if they weren't in hospice, still you can do that. If they weren't in hospice, but they were still ill and terminally ill.
Well, they weren't. My mother wasn't ill, but
Okay,
she
that's
was
a different.
85.
Okay, that's a different scenario. Then you need to call the police when a person dies in any unexpected way at home. But the police will come and the medical examiner will come, and if they can ascertain on site that the death was accidental or of natural causes, then they will generate the paperwork, start to fill out the death certificate, and you can say at that point, I don't want to call in a funeral home, I want to do this myself, and they'll release the body to your care.
Because my poor sister was spending the night with my mother because my mother didn't feel well. And she woke up and my mother was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And she called the rescue squad.
Oh,
And the rescue
Right.
squad legally had to
they
try
have
to
to. That's right.
bring her back.
That's right. So that's something for y'all to know. Don't call 911 because they
Marian-
do have to. Yes.
Marian, in a practical way, how do you get a body from a nursing home or a hospital to your home?
Right. Well, you have a friend with a truck or a van. You can purchase one of these, or you can have a stretcher, a backboard, bodyboard, kinds of things like the people that use for rescue. Do you know what
And
I'm
would the
saying?
nursing home lend you a stretcher?
I don't know. They might. You might have to ask them about that. But that's why it's good to think about this ahead of time and let them know that you're planning it and involve them.
Could you say something about the length of time you can keep a body before it becomes a problem in your home?
Right.
With odor and anything else that might be associated with...
Right. A body can be preserved using dry ice. And the way that that works is, well, the law says a body has to be refrigerated or embalmed within 24 hours. So this is how you, so refrigeration consists of using dry ice. You could actually, if you can't get to the dry ice right away, you can just use, people have used packages of frozen vegetables or gel packs and what you want to do with the dry ice when you get it is wrap it in a towel and place it under the torso of the body because that's where the major organs are that are subject to decomposition.
Where do you get the dry ice?
You can get dry ice at Medford Dry Ice Company, and they will cut it to the size that you ask. If you tell them that it's for a body, they're very nice there, and you can go and pick it up. But if it's after their hours, you can just do the other thing that I was, gel packs or whatever. And Safeway actually has small pieces of dry ice.
So you could put a slab of dry ice underneath the body,
Yes.
and that would fulfill the requirement
Of refrigeration.
to refrigerate the body?
Yes. And I have heard of people keeping a body at home up to 7 days. Now, it depends, if you're in the middle of our 106-degree weathers in August, you might not want to do that for 7 days. Or you might need to put 2 air conditioners in a room and use dry ice. You have to adjust it, but up to 7 days I have heard of. And generally, 3 to 4 days is more common. Yes?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, I see the process unfolding in which I'd actually like to participate. If everything goes well, I could be in that box and feel really comfortable with my family doing exactly some of the
Great.
things in that. And that's why my wife and I are here.
Great.
But I've spent 30 years in emergency medicine as a physician, and I've seen a lot of traumatic deaths, unexpected,
Right.
unplanned, no birth plan, no death plan. I mean, I'm using the birth plan.
Yes.
Like you could just sit and wait because they're going to die and they're in the other room. That isn't the way it happens many
Yes.
times. And some of the things that are relatively grotesque, gunshot to the head to the wound, or gunshot to the head, a hanging, all sorts of manners of relatively changes in the body that many people in the family would be uncomfortable with.
Right.
I see that this may not work in those situations,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people in that category. We have like 40,000 deaths on the highways every year. I'm wanting to be in that box at age 80 and be comforted by my family and have them experience what this is likely to be about. But you have to expect the unexpected. And so how do people deal with that in those situations? What are your recommendations?
I don't have an answer for you, a one pat answer,
Well,
except to
a lot
say
of people
that
die that way, so
Right.
how are they going to get accommodated into the shroud with the family being comfortable with them having some grotesque injury?
Well, that just seems that it would be a conversation to have with the family member at the time. I mean, it's so individual. I
Yeah,
don't.
I understand that, but
yeah.
it's hard for families to deal with a death to begin with,
Sure.
let alone something that's in that category.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, but I leave the building today, or this evening, I'm killed in a car,
Right.
and my family's not going to probably participate in that
Mhm.
way. They're going to be so taken back by the immediacy of it, as
Mhm.
opposed to the hospice or the AIDS patient that dies
Right.
peacefully in their room, and we can all anoint them and do those things that are very,
Mhm.
very blessed for everyone, but it's a hard situation in many other cases. So, I see this as selecting the best case scenario for me,
Mhm.
age 80, and I pass away, and I die, I'm dead, and my family says, let's do the shroud. That's what Dad wanted. Yeah. But the other cases you have no answer for. You just
No,
they
I
have to-
don't really.
they
I
have to
mean,
make
it's
the
a
decision.
case by case. Yeah, you would make your decision in the moment.
Okay.
But do you have something you want to say, that addresses that?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for bringing that up,
Yeah.
because that's another thing that I should now think about, telling my family what to do if I die in a horrible accident, and I don't expect them to come and, necessarily wash me or whatever. In that situation, I might say, call a professional to clean the body, and in my case, I want to be cremated. So, I think that's a really good thing to think about,
Yeah.
and not assume that you're going to die at home in bed. But, it's kind of up to me to decide how I want to have my family involved or not involved, and let them know.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for bringing that up.
For the gentleman over there, what about hospice? Having them call hospice? You can't do that?
No.
Sudden death is not
We've got to move you out of the ER pretty quick, and a decision has to be made, and somebody has to get the body. We can't keep a room waiting, and there's no
Yeah.
morgue downstairs. You have to go somewhere.
Because the nurse that talks about hospice, that's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
But the other question was on cremation. I talked to him. You
Oh.
said remind you.
Okay. You were wanting to know what the environmental considerations are regarding cremation. Yeah, well, it's a fair amount of fuel to cremate a body. They have to keep the retort, I think they have to heat it to 2,000 degrees for a couple of hours before they even put the body in. And I think it takes a couple of hours. I've lost my statistic on that. But the other thing is that there's a lot of people who are cremated who have mercury fillings, and that goes into the air. And there's some statistic of an amazing amount of pounds of mercury just going up the stack. Now, more and more, the crematoriums that are made more recently have, the technology is better, and they have better filters, and they're using higher heat and whatever, but it's still, there is an environmental cost to cremation. Nina?
I want to thank
Wait,
the doctor
can you-
for bringing up
okay.
this subject too, because I don't want to go to a funeral home or have those people handling me, nor do I want to be stared at after I'm dead. I think that is absolutely horrible. So even if nothing awful happens to me, I want to be covered up in the process and not have this big looking at ritual going on. So I think it's good to talk about these things.
Yeah.
I just might add that sometimes it's the family that decides all these things. As much as you would like to plan
Right.
and have your box, they may say, I'm totally uncomfortable with that right now. I can't deal with this for whatever reason. And it's been our experience to have our family members die sometimes not in the way, or we changed, they died and we changed some of the ways that they thought it would happen. In my own cases, my mother was cremated and I was supposed to take her out to sea and put her off, but when there was a big storm, I couldn't get out, and I lived quite a ways away at the time. And I kept her in a drawer in my dresser for 8 years before I finally figured out where to place her. And now, that isn't what she wanted, but that's what I needed, and that's what I did. So
You mean her cremated remains?
cremated remains.
Just wanted to get that clear.
Actually, she was in my heart all the time, so
Yes.
she never left me. Yeah.
I actually have a question. If
Okay.
I may. I was wondering about the cremation because my instinct is I would like to actually be. I don't want to go in anything. I would like to be burned on a pyre outside. They can pull my fillings out first. I don't care. I'm surprised they don't do that at cremation. Why don't they just take the fillings out before they burn them?
I don't know.
But so can you do that? Can you have a pyre?
Not in this state.
Is there anywhere in this country you can just?
I have read an account of a beautiful outdoor cremation on private land in Colorado. So that I'm assuming that it's legal in Colorado. I have not researched other states. I did talk to the medical examiner, to the State Mortuary and Cemetery Board about this, and he said to me, people wanted to do Viking funerals. Which is, a funeral pyre on a boat. And he said the practicalities of that are that if you don't put enough fuel, the body doesn't burn completely. It washes up on shore, then some children playing find a body part, then the police are involved, then there's a whole investigation, et cetera, et cetera. So what I think about all that is, okay, well, we don't know how to do that anymore. We could learn how to do that. We could figure that out. But it just takes people doing it. And then going to the State Mortuary and Cemetery Board and saying, I want to do this. Look, they do it over in this country or in that state or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying?
So when you want to research something, you go to the State Mortuary Board?
Mortuary and Cemetery Board.
So is there a clearinghouse of information if you wanted to research what state you can do what in?
That actually, well, I don't know if it says that about open cremations, but there is a book that gives you state-by-state regulations around home care of the dead. It's called Caring for the Dead. The woman in the film, Lisa Carlson, wrote this book. So this is a place to start for that kind of information.
Is that on your handout?
Yes. And a good way to get this book is to join the Funeral Consumers Alliance. I do want to tell you about that because they are a really wonderful organization. And if you join, I think the membership is $25 or $30, and you get this book half price if you join, which makes it $15 instead of $30. But you also get, when you join, this very cool kit, which has a nice clear pouch with a booklet inside that's it's entitled "Before I Go, You Should Know," and it just has places for you to answer questions about legal matters or what your choices are regarding funerals, or if you have a burial plot or whatever, that sort of information that you would want people to know. It's all right here. And they recommend that you fill this out, you put it in this pouch, and you put it in the freezer. And then they give you this little magnet that you put on the outside of the freezer door, and it says, "Matters of life and death" inside. And they have a newsletter that they publish. Here's Consumer Help Thyself is the lead article in this one. And they are really wonderful advocates for people who want to know anything about or are dealing with funeral homes or having difficulties or having legal difficulties with getting a body moved from one place or another. They also have a great resource of pamphlets that they publish, and now they've put them in PDF form online so that you can print them off yourself. There's like 26 different pamphlets.
Who's they?
The Funeral Consumers Alliance, and the address and their website is on this paper that I'll hand out. But I really recommend supporting them and becoming a member. They're great. Yeah.
I was in India, by the Ganges, where they had brought the bodies down, and if you had to have enough money though to pay for the wood, and that was the big thing. And if you had enough money, then they burned you and had the ashes there, and it was very open, very low key. And if you didn't have the money, then they would take your body and wrap it up and tie string around it with rocks. And they would go out with a boat, and then you just sink down.
Wow.
But occasionally, and we saw these bodies floating around out there because they didn't have enough rocks, or the rocks fell off or whatever. It was memorable. But my question is, see, I was thinking about being buried in my yard, but I don't want my daughter to not be able to sell the property. So I do have a location off of Normal Street already. And so if I wanted, I would like to be part of the earth. That would be my preference. So do you think if I talk to my family and then I talk to, or somehow they would have to talk to them, that they could put it upside down?
Yes, that's the cemetery where I spoke with the sexton.
That's
yeah.
okay then. So if I tell them all that, then
Yeah.
so they're just kind of
Right.
or something.
So they won't, they'll put the body in the grave first and put the container over it.
That's great.
Are there other questions?
I have another one.
Okay.
If you fill out all the things that you want to happen on your death, like I've heard of the living will, but I've never done it. I got one in the mail and I never did it. Like, can you just go to a notary? Like, how do you make it official, and then how do you make it so people know where to find it when you go?
Well, you have it witnessed and signed. You can go to a notary.
That's good enough.
You can do that.
Oh, cool.
And you talk to your family. That's like the biggest thing to do, is talk to your family or the people who you expect to be around, and get it clear with them before they're in the situation of going, I can't believe she wants us to do that after you're already dead. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, if you have this conversation, you could show them this film, you could, show them this book, or bring some information from the Funeral Consumers Alliance. Just keep talking to them so that they are on board with your plan. That's the biggest thing.
And where do you get one of those?
You can buy these from the funeral home. They do have them. They don't usually let you know that they have them. I don't. But
What are they called?
This is a cardboard cremation container. I painted it. It comes just plain cardboard. They're about $100 from the funeral home. I bought several of them from a woman in California who has a company that manufactures them, and I had them shipped here. That was an interesting experience. She said, do you mind me asking you, why do you want these? But then when I told her, she got really excited, and we talked for 45 minutes. So yeah. And actually, I had a program here for a while in Ashland, in which I took these boxes to high school students. And I'm an artist, and I have a studio at the Briscoe Art Wing, and so part of our deal with the county is that we teach art in the schools. And so I told the teachers there that I wanted to talk to their students about death, and then I wanted to create art that had some relationship to what our feelings about death were. And so I talked to them. That was really interesting. They freaked out in great ways, and they were much more out there with their freakouts, so we could address everything right away. And then the next time I came in, I brought this box, and that was really interesting, because they just went, whoa, jumped back, or they said, can I get inside of it? And so we talked about it, and I explained what this was and that we were going to decorate it. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, what am I going to do with all these decorated boxes? So I called the medical examiner, and I asked what happens to homeless people in the valley when they die, and he said that they were handled by a rotation of the funeral homes. And so I got the phone number and the schedule of rotation, and I started calling them and telling them about this project and asking them if I could bring a decorated box and trade it for an undecorated box. And so they said, what were they going to say no? They couldn't really say no to that. So they said yes, of course. And then I was able to say to the students, this is for someone who otherwise would not have anyone to do this for them. And they were really moved by that. They were really, and they did the most beautiful artwork. They drew, painted a tree of life on the lid. They did, doves and sunrises. They wrote words like gratitude or journey or transformation on the sides of the boxes. And we did a little ceremony in which they wrote blessings on pieces of paper and read them aloud, and then we rang a bell and put them in the box. And so when we delivered these boxes to the funeral homes, they had those blessings on the paper inside of them also. And I encourage you to know that you can do that. You can buy one of these, set it up on sawhorses in the garage, get some paints, and have your family members work on it. And people have said this was so positive for them. It helped them to start engaging their grieving process, to be writing a message on here. Some people have put collages on the inside of the lids, all sorts of things. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I don't have an actual question. I'm trying to form some response to all of this, and I keep hearing this sense that people somehow want to manage what happens to them after they die. But I want to make the remark that you're not there anymore. When I die, Jim will not be here anymore. He'll just be whatever. I'm not sure what happens then, but anything that happens with this body that I'm sitting here talking now with will be for the people who cared about me, not about me. It's not for me because I'm gone. I'm done with this whole thing at that point. And I think it would be interesting to look at the whole process that we're trying to put our hands on here from the point of view that whatever happens, the writing on the cardboard box, the ceremony, the whatever, it's for the people who survive and who are still living so that they can come to some kind of an understanding of what has happened, that Jim is actually really gone, and it's not for him per se, it's for the people who are still around. So I don't know, it's not a very formed remark, but that I find it a little bit disturbing. In a sense, I don't care. I mean, right now, I might have some feeling that I care, but when I'm dead and gone, I certainly will not care one whit what happens. So.
How do you know?
Well, I don't think so, Marian. I think.
Jim, do you want the $20,000 casket and the deluxe?
No, I think I could dispense with that. But, for example, you see an animal get hit by a car, it's gone. There's no question about the fact that it's gone. We're really a form of monkey.
You make a good point about this being for the people who are left, and that's important. It's very important. It's ecology of our community, of our family, to attend to this in a way that feels respectful, that allows the people who are left to express their grief and to move forward in their life. And for me, if I think about that, my idea about directing how I want this to happen is about that. And it's true that there is a little bit of, oh, I want to be wearing this because I want to look good, or whatever. There's that, and I know that's silly, but it's also the other thing. It's I want to attend to the people that I love and make sure that I do everything I can think of beforehand to facilitate them being able to move on after I'm gone. So.
Seems like there's an environmental impact issue, though, as well. I don't know if you did you talk about that, like the chemicals and the yeah.
Yeah,
so
we did talk some
okay,
about
okay.
that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see any difference in beloved pet that we bury. We've got a rock, big boulder that we have several pets grouped around over the last 20 years that we've been in Ashland, and we knew that we were going to place them there well in advance of their deaths, and we go out there at times and think about them, and we have moments that are reflective, and I'd like to be cared for as with my pets in a way from my family's viewpoint, and I see that's very similar. We don't think about them degrading. They're 2 feet down is all I can dig most of the time. It's granite around where we live, so I only get so far, and they're back in the environment, which is wonderful, so
Thanks.
hopefully we can take care of ourselves like we do our pets.
Thanks. Another question in the back there.
May I ask a question?
Certainly.
Do you know of a wildlife preserve around Ashland where someone could have a green burial?
No, I don't. I've heard of a facility that is an end-of-life care facility that's opening that has been working to get the paperwork together. to have burial there, but I don't know the status of that as yet.
And as far as you know, like, you can't just decide to go to Grizzly Peak and dig a hole or anything?
No, definitely can't do that. There are more and more, though, in the United States. The first green burial park in the United States was in South Carolina. It was started by a man named Billy Campbell, who's a doctor. And that's what I wanted to talk about. He and another fellow named Joel Seehee are working together on the Green Burial Council. And what they want to do, which I think is a really good idea, is form standards so that when you go somewhere that you're going somewhere that is a green burial cemetery, that you have an idea that it means what you think it means. Just like organic. What does organic mean? You know, we had to get standards together, and all the organic farmers, you know, were back and forth and up and down and sideways, and sort of eventually formed an alliance to figure out, okay, what does certified organic mean? It's the same kind of a procedure, and I think it's a good idea if we do that, and that is starting to happen in the United States. And now in England, they're kind of scratching their heads and going, maybe, I think we need to do something like that, because they didn't. So, and the places that I have heard of are nature preserves, but so you're not allowed to have any kind of a headstone or marker. But they're using GPS, Global Positioning System technology, so that if you want to know exactly where the person is buried, you know, you can find it. But we're not going to be, you know. And some people think, oh, I think it's a great idea. I just want to plant a tree right over my grave. But if you think about that a little further along, you can't just have a big piece of property where someone decides to plant azaleas here next to a redwood over there and we have to think about, well, what kinds of plants would grow well in this property, or what do we even need to? Do we need that kind of a monument? Do you need to know? Do you need to be able to walk up to that redwood tree? Would it even grow there? You know, do you know what I'm saying? It's like we have to keep thinking a little bit more further along with that, and just the idea that people are coming to is saying, well, what if we just have this piece of land where nature can do whatever it does, and we can just walk on it and enjoy it, and there's trees over on this part, and this is a meadow over here, and you're just buried there somewhere, and you can just go and know that someone that you love is under the earth there, pushing up daisies, literally, you know. Did you have another question?
Yeah, well,
wait a minute. Oops, she's got the microphone. Hold on.
I was wondering in the different methods, is there one that's more ecologically or efficiency, whatever, you know, with the body decaying or does being cremated have more or less an effect than say
ecologically? Right now, cremation has a bigger ecological impact than simple body burial with not being embalmed and being put in a simple shroud or a wooden casket.
From air pollution, but supposing they get, you know, like filtering systems,
right. Mm-hmm.
Then.
And I just want to say.
There you are, you know, a 5-foot person, and
right.
you're a little pile.
Right.
And you don't take up much room.
You don't take up much room, and that's.
And you're more or less clean
mm-hmm.
and ready to go back.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And I just want to say that I want to be buried in the ground, but I'm not saying that you shouldn't be cremated. I mean, I think it's a perfectly acceptable choice. I just want to give you information to make those kinds of choices.
And I too wouldn't mind if they remove, you know, the mercury teeth or
mm-hmm.
whatever that would cause the pollutants.
Yeah.
I also wondered when you got embalmed, doesn't that burning of the embalmed body put more into the air?
I don't know the
than
statistics,
an
but it
unembalmed?
seems like it would.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about that chemical.
Wondering whether it's more or less toxic than burying
Yeah.
that same embalmed body.
We have another question here, so thanks.
To cross state lines to get over to a green cemetery in another state, is it going to be
Mm-hmm.
required that body gets embalmed?
Depends how far you're going. Depends. People have just put grandma in the trunk or in the back seat or in the, you know, and just driven. I mean, I can't tell you that that's okay legally, but right. So some people have done that, okay, but crossing state lines, you may end up, if it's, you know, if you want to drive from here to Kentucky, then you're probably going to want to. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And I can't really give you an answer to that. Did you see the movie Little Miss Sunshine? Okay. One thing I want to tell you, in the thing that I was saying earlier about if you want to take a body home from a hospital or from a nursing care facility, that you have to know your rights and you have to have people to support you and stand up for you. It's true about all the aspects of this home funeral, green burial, that we have to educate our legislators. We have to educate the people who are in these offices. Like I went to the Department of Vital Records several times to get information about this, and the woman there was very protective. She didn't want to give me a death certificate. She didn't want to give me a tag. She didn't want to. It took me a while to. 3 or 4 visits, finally, I went back there and I said, actually, I know that I have the legal right to get these things from you. But she didn't really know that. And she was just doing her job in the way that she felt was the right way to do her job. And I have experience of some friends of mine in Washington, right after we all took a course with one of the women in the film, actually, on death midwifery. She called her, I guess it was her Vital Records department, to ask, just to verify that it was okay for people in Washington State to care for their own at home after death. And the person on the other end of the phone said, well, that's still true as of today, which she thought was kind of an odd answer. And she asked a few more questions, and he said, again, something like, well, yeah, as of right now, you still have the right. And she said, you're trying to tell me something, aren't you? And he said, yes, right now in the legislature, it's being talked about. They're rewording the laws connected to funerals. So in most states, the funeral law has a phrase that says the funeral practitioner or person in charge of the body. It's a phrase something like that. That's the phrase that makes it legal for families to take care of a body. Well, they were just revising this ancient language and they were going to strike that phrase. And most of the people who were advising the rewrite were funeral directors. Because our legislators have so much to do, it sort of makes sense. You can understand their thinking like, okay, well, who should be on the state mortuary and cemetery board? Well, these guys know what to, okay, let's have it be them. Oh, who are we going to ask to advise us? Well, they know, let's ask them. So I really encourage you to think about encouraging our legislators to think more about this, letting them know that you want to make sure that you still have the right to do this. So what they did was immediately marshal forces and go to the state offices, and they called Josh Slocum and they called Lisa Carlson from the Funeral Consumers Alliance. Funeral Consumers Alliance gave them copies of this book, several copies, like a dozen copies, so they could hand them out to people. They got people who had done home funerals to testify in front of their legislators. And they said, you know, really, as soon as we just were there talking and people were telling their stories, the legislators really didn't know that this was going to, they didn't really know the effect that it would have to strike that wording. And so it was really easy to convince them not to have that done. But it was just some magical thing that she happened to call that day, that person happened to say that to her, she happened to know exactly what to do, who to call, da-da-da-da-da. So I just say that to say we have to bring what we are learning to the people who are administering the laws that are going to affect us, or to the hospitals, or to the nursing facilities, or whatever.
What state was that?
That was Washington State. Mm-hmm.
Is it important to have a death certificate then if you're going to transport
Yes.
the body or go somewhere
Yes.
or do something, that you have to have a
You do.
death certificate signed by whoever is qualified to sign
You do.
it?
That's the permit
And
for
that's a
transportation.
very important piece of paper,
Yes,
I would
and you
think.
can get that at the Department of Vital Records.
Mm.
And there's also online information about how to fill them out, but you do. I'm aware that we have about 5 more minutes, so.
I've considered
Hold on.
saying
Is it-
this. I'm a retired medical examiner.
Ah, you should have told me
investigator.
sooner.
And what the doctor said is absolutely true. I personally processed 2,476 bodies, and many of those were a knock on the door, 3 o'clock in the morning type of situation. And what you're saying about talking about what could happen or what might happen, I think is very, very important, because these are things that you're cold, you're absolutely hit cold with this stuff, and you have no idea what to do, and it's just, oh my God, you know? And it does happen, and it happens a lot. And I believe that forethought in this kind of a situation would save a lot of trouble, really.
Thanks.
And a lot of just plain shock.
Yeah.
Especially if you got a teenage driver. Oh. So this is something to consider, definitely. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks both of you for bringing that up, and I think that I'll start to put that in my talk as well, to just say to people, you know, this is kind of the best case scenario, but it might not be possible. Thank you all very much for being here, for some great questions, and I just... Oh, yeah. Oh, well. I thought people had done that at the break.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.